Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friends, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and today we are talking about a documentary, Walt. A documentary about a certain pro wrestler who is a big deal, who is changing companies, who is a rising, I guess I want to call him a rising star, but he is a star internationally at least, and that's sort of the idea of this doc. It's in the name, as you can see in your podcast player. The doc is called Ospreay, The Rise of an International Pro Wrestler, and it's a documentary about Will Ospreay that came out in 2020, and it's a thing. Well, I think we watched this documentary because Ospreay is a big deal. He's going to AEW full time. It was a big signing. Could he go to WWE? Was he going to leave Japan? So we were like, oh wow, let's learn more about this guy. What a great excuse to talk about someone we haven't really talked about a ton. And then it's basically a documentary that looks like it was made by somebody at their house with access to some people, and then they just filmed a bunch of stuff and put it out there.
Yeah, this felt less like a doc, because there really wasn't a point to it other than just hey, we're talking about Will Ospreay today. What about him? I don't know, that he grew up and is a wrestler. Okay, cool. Is that worth?
The only person to ever grow up and become a wrestler.
Yeah, right. So it's they have a lot of found footage, and they have a lot of old family video of him in a trampoline and visiting his high school. But to say this is a documentary is a bit much.
Do you know where this came from? I mean, this, like I said, we picked this because we found it on Amazon Prime, and we were like, well, I guess we should do it. But do you know where this actually, how this was born, came to be?
It's 2019, and it's on Amazon, and that's all I know about.
Okay. Yes. Well, so doing a little research, this was from a Kickstarter, if you can believe it. This cobbled together thing was fan funded and such. Someone was making a documentary about Ospreay. I believe, according to this article I'm reading, in 2016, they launched a Kickstarter, and they needed 15,000 pounds to complete a documentary about Ospreay, and they really wanted footage of him in Japan. And they were like, give us some money, and we'll give you, you'll appreciate this. Well, one of the rewards was a cheeky Nando's with Will Ospreay. So you could get some Nando's with Ospreay, and if you're in the UK, presumably, and a bunch of other stuff. And they took the money, and they, I guess, finished the movie, but they apparently were not very communicative with their backers. And then all of a sudden it appeared one day out in the world, and now it just exists. So it wasn't it doesn't look like a professional, produced, slick piece of filmmaking, and it's not. And it also sounds a little, I don't want to say controversial, but sketchy in how it came to be. So, but the one thing I will say to that whole thing is the parts about Japan are by far the most interesting stuff. Like you said, the UK stuff, it's, I suppose, the upbringing of wrestlers is sometimes intriguing. We've talked about that a million times on the show. So usually it's included because I think it just has to be part of the story. But the fish out of water, Ospreay learning about Japanese culture, trying to assimilate, trying to figure out, his new life over there. I love that. I wish there was a whole movie about that. That's the kind of thing I find interesting.
Yeah, fish out of water, and also too, the wrestlers going to Japan is a thing that's happened for so long and is talked about for so long, and in some ways is a rite of passage. But to be able to have so much footage about it is it gives you a better sense of what it actually means versus reading it in a book of to go on a tour bus through Japan. It's okay, well, don't you take buses in a lot of countries you wrestle in? Doesn't give me a sense of place, especially a place like Japan versus they're talking about going to Germany and going to other European countries. But it's the video piece, I'll say, kind of took us.
Well, I see now that you're denigrating it by calling it a video piece.
It's a piece. It takes us in a few directions and non sequiturs in some ways, where it's they spend 10 minutes talking about WWE and WWE taking European talent, but not really like connecting it to Will Ospreay. It's like we're just talking about WWE now, and like okay, like did Will Ospreay have a
Yeah, I was like, was he in the
stance on
NXT?
this?
Was he in the NXT UK tournament or something? Like, no, he was not. I don't believe. Like, it was his friends were, but I don't think he was. Like, it was very piecemeal in that regard.
Yeah, it's like we're gonna talk about Ricochet. It's like obviously if you know about Will Ospreay in his career, like Ricochet is a big part of it, but like just talking about Ricochet by himself for like multiple minutes to set up like, oh, by the way, they had these like cool matches together. Kind of just like, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? Why are we talking about this? And like, so it just felt like aimless at times. Not to like, really take a pickaxe to a fucking like Kickstarter piece, but like, I was just like, this was a choice.
Yeah, it didn't. I think when we first heard about it, it didn't seem like it was so cobbled together and so seemingly fan made. Like I don't know. I was intrigued because there is elements there is I think a cohesive element to the Ospreay story that I find intriguing. Like especially if you could finish the story now in 2024, even better because like we said he's at new heights. But even back then, like if they had actually had the funding and the time and the commitments to tell the story of this person who grew up in the UK, went to Japan, experienced new cultures, like had this match with like had like they didn't even really dive into the point of the Ricochet matches, which I care about, and which I think most people know about, is because that match basically went viral online. They were the two flippy guys. Like they were these guys who I think everyone sort of wrote off, especially like the Jim Cornettes of the world and the old school wrestling types, wrote it off as just dumb bullshit because it's just two guys doing all these acrobatic stunts, and they're like, where's the story, where's the chemistry, where's the psychology, where's all this? Like any gymnast can do this. And obviously, I think time has proven that to be incorrect because, at the very least, Ricochet works for WWE and Ospreay works for AEW. Ospreay is a former world champion. Like most people, the industry seems to have embraced them, and I would say they have both evolved beyond just gymnasts doing handsprings in the ring. But that's the point of the story that I find. I would like. I think there's a half hour on that alone. Like, what do you do when your match goes viral in whatever that was, 2015, 2016? Like, like what, you don't get any money from that. Like it's promotion and it's exposure you can't buy. But what happens next? And also what happens when half the internet is calling you a piece of shit? Half of the people are just normies saying, "Whoa, cool." Like, what does that mean for a wrestler's career? Like, I would love to learn more about that. Like I would love to hear about the aftermath of that moment and how it changed his life for better and worse. And instead we just get, like you said, we get an unrelated match just sort of showing that these two have a connection in the history. That's great, but what does that mean in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, it's also kind of fun to dissect that in hindsight. It's like one wrestler still kind of just known as the flippy wrestler.
That's true. He didn't really evolve. He got a nice cushy job out of it, but he's not necessarily his craft hasn't really evolved, right?
Yeah, and the other is like, world class of wrestling. So but we can dissect what that means in the context of Will Ospreay in 2024. But like, yeah, there certainly seems to have been an evolution since that time. But I guess if you're going to be doing that kind of work, and they did talk about this at some point in the doc. It's like, to put your body through all that earlier in your career, like to your point, like that doesn't put more money on the table. It gives them the exposure, but by the time they get to the part of their career where they're like finally quote unquote made it, it's like what's left, and then that's a whole different philosophical debate of like, is that worth the risk of like potentially like ending your career early to just stand out?
Yeah, and the documentary does, again, as one of the many tendrils that you sort of said, like the fragmented tendrils, they do mention that, they have Marty Scurll is highly featured in this documentary, which is which is funny because he is entirely persona non grata now. Like, he is basically barred from wrestling informally or otherwise after the events of the Speaking Out campaign and numerous allegations labeled at him. But he is they didn't bother. I guess they couldn't have cut him out of this. He was like the main character besides Ospreay, so he's all over this. But he does say there's stuff I did back then that they couldn't pay me to do now, which is funny because they didn't pay me at all back then. But now I gotta figure out other ways, which is sort of a testament to Ospreay and his evolution. He has become a guy where he still does cool stuff, and he does take every match I've seen of his, even the recent ones, is him taking one outrageous risk at least that he does not need to take and seemingly breaking his neck or something insane. But it's not like it's not the just it's not back handsprings, it's not cartwheels, and not that he does cartwheels. It's not the stuff that he was known for in the beginning. Like now he's just more of a death defier as opposed to just a gymnast cosplaying as a wrestler. So there's something there, but it is you're right. There is a need to move beyond that at some point because your knees and everything just can't handle it anymore.
Yeah, well, in Ospreay's case, trying a Spanish fly on the apron, for example. I don't know where that, but that was kind of crazy seeing that, within the first 10 minutes, seeing them kind of show like old footage of him doing like a 450?
A 630, I think, right?
Just lands right on his goddamn neck.
And it's totally his own fault too. It wasn't like he's like, I flipped bad, I flipped wrong, and I landed on my neck. Like nothing else, nothing but me fucking up. Yeah,
so I mean, guys had some pretty bad injuries.
Yes, and I wish this had been, it's like I said, I don't want to poke holes and bash something like this that clearly is not meant for, not to be held up against, the what is on Peacock and what was on the network or what has been produced by Vice or any number of other outlets that we've covered on this show and otherwise. That is slick, well produced, good storytelling. This is none of those things. So I think you and I decided when we talked about this, like, throw all that out the window. This is not meant to be judged on a similar objective scale. But it is. I wish there had been more here because Ospreay is very indicative of a sort of famous wrestler these days. That is he actually famous? That's what I kept thinking we were watching this. Like, he's a former New Japan champion. So that is, he is having that title just automatically should make you a huge important person. He's, world IWGP World Heavyweight Champ. There are not many of those. So that's pretty amazing. But if you look at his career, he's been around the world. Like, he was obviously from the UK. He's been in Japan for 7-8 years now. Like, he's been in TNA for a second. He's been in AEW for a while. So, like, he's done all these things. And people like you and I and anyone who watches wrestling consistently certainly knows him. But who is this guy really? And even moving beyond that, does a company like AEW signing him full time, does that even matter? Like, who isn't watching AEW now, but is going to turn it on because Will Ospreay is there? And I don't mean to slight his talent or anything about him. I just mean in terms of pure numbers, pure business. Like, what does it mean in 2024 to sign a Will Ospreay, who in theory is one of the biggest free agents there's ever going to be, but also what does it matter if no one knows or cares outside of 800,000 people?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
There is. That was like an 8-version question. So you can tackle it in whatever order you like.
Well, it's funny watching this back because it's like a period piece. It's like, what a time and a place in like 8 years ago in the indies scene or the UK scene where it's like, you look at the Ospreay doc and he's like, in hindsight, he's like the 6th most famous person in that doc now, because like the Bucks and Cody and AJ and Ricochet are all mainstream stars now and have been for years. And I think because of his exposure in New Japan and because of his exposure in AEW, like, he's getting there, but he's nowhere near those other guys, I would say. Like, yeah, people know who Cody is. People know who the Bucks are, sort of. Like, people know, like... Yeah. I don't want to keep speculating because, like, who am I talking about and what do they know and how could they? But I just think, though, that, like, he's still most famous person that I saw on that documentary. Like,
Yep.
even Adam Morrison's more famous than him, I would argue.
John Morrison.
Or shit, Adam Morrison's
Gonzaga's
the
Adam
Gonzaga
Morrison.
guy. Yeah. Whoops.
Possibly
Yes.
not. He's probably more famous than Adam Morrison these days. But
Johnny
you're right.
Nitro.
Yeah, Johnny Nitro, Johnny Impact. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. And I think it's sort of part of it is there was such a, you and I talked about going to Wrestle Kingdom in an episode many years ago, available at our archives, awesometruth.libsyn.com. And we went when Jericho came over, when Kenny was there, when the Bucks were still, I think we're in the first or the second match on the card. Cody was there. Like, there was so much talent there. And then all the Japanese wrestlers, Okada, Naito, Tanahashi, they were all at their prime. And it was just a huge time for New Japan, and it was truly a spectacle. Like, it was for people like you and I, Americans who had never seen it before. We wanted to learn more. Japanese fans were obviously rabid for it. Like, it was a promotion really on the come up. And now, Ospreay won the title in 2020, similar to Drew Mack. Unfortunately, that's not really when you want to win the title if you have a choice. And then I think, like, New Japan's been, especially since AEW came out, New Japan's been on the downslope. They lost some people, they lost a lot of their good Americans and just and white guys, and it just hasn't been the same for them. They weren't able to take that momentum and at least expand internationally. They weren't able to get that much bigger than they were at that moment. So I think it's just a weird dynamic because so many of those guys who rode that initial wave, like you said, went on to huge heights. Like, especially Cody, who's about to win the world title at the time of this. We think at the time of this recording, but everyone else, like you said, has main evented shows in America and otherwise, and been the head of a company, the star of a company. Ricochet fought Logan Paul, even. That's so much more than Ospreay can say. Even though Ospreay's had much more success, as you said, and is certainly become the way better wrestler. He didn't face Logan Paul at a major pay-per-view, so like. It's just, I don't know. It's not a knock on him. It's not a knock even on his business choices or anything. Like, he seemed happy enough doing what he was doing, but it's just wild that he was a little behind that wave, and and history and time sort of passed him by. And I hope he makes something of it in AEW. But it is interesting that he's certainly, like you said, leaps and bounds behind those other guys he can be compared to.
Yeah, and I think building rivalries that matter is important, right? I mean, because like what they were kind of doing with him and Kenny, and I guess they're still kind of doing it, is what's I think ultimately going to really elevate him in the way that like being on the internet and wrestling Ricochet in things that people wanted to see, like being like now he has, but like before when he was doing that with Ricochet and it was like the spectacle. It was like something you could only see on Twitter because, most people didn't have like Fight TV or whatever was predated Fight TV
yes.
to watch this crap. But ultimately though, having the AEW like vehicle times, like they still have big shows planned and potentially big things planned for this guy. Because if they intend to go back to Wembley, they're probably they should center around him in a way that they didn't quite do last time.
Yeah, when he fought Jericho, which is on paper big, but if you're a 30-year-old, about to break out country star, I don't know if that's the match you really would love to have.
Right. Well, but that's not the match everybody wanted to see.
No.
Had he had this epic, like Bulldog Brett-esque like match in Wembley with like Kenny or someone else, it's like, yeah, maybe we're talking about him differently today. But ultimately though, I think being at AEW does set him up for the most, or not the most, but a lot of success to break out and become a household name in a way that New Japan couldn't and Indies couldn't, and obviously UK scene could not.
Yeah, but I mean, it's sort of the same. It's possible, given where AEW is right now, that he missed that wave too. Like AEW is in a very weird place right now. Like, I mean, Samoa Joe is the champion. I enjoy Samoa Joe. He's a pretty old man at this point. MJF is taking time off. The Adam Cole thing seems to is floundering already. Like, Kenny's taking a ton of time off. Like it's a period of transition at best for them, and maybe Ospreay's the perfect person to come in and take over and become that new face of the company for the next couple of years, because God knows they need somebody. But what if he's coming in a little too late again? What if he's not even there yet? What if he comes in 3-4 weeks and things keep getting worse? Like, I don't know. Like, I hope that's not the case.
Sure.
He's fun to watch. The couple of matches I've seen, I enjoy his work, and I think he will be appealing, especially to the AEW fandom. But I really hope they have something planned for him and they don't squander this talent for his sake, for their sake, for everybody's sake.
Yeah, I mean, and not to make a really shallow argument, but like, I think AEW is still a place where you can break out. Like, it's not like, oh wow, you signed with TNA, like you might as well, like, good for you. It's like, no, I mean, like, they have the tools to make him a household name. Now, whether it happens or not, I don't know. But like, what is MJF's Q rating with regards to like wrestling fans, casual and otherwise? Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's not a leading question. I don't know that answer. Like, I'm curious if you have like some sort of insight there, because like, I think that question helps answer how big of a star can this guy be.
Yeah, and like, I mean, you're whether I don't know the answer to that either, but I will say
maybe that's a bad question.
But it's higher than it was 3-4 years ago. Like, he's one of those guys that Tony brought him in, and everyone was like, watch out for this guy, and then it worked out exactly as everyone, best case scenario. So he is, for all AEW's faults, he's one of those guys that you cannot deny. And like, maybe he was going to get over no matter what, but it's nothing is a sure thing. Nothing is a guarantee. Like, he earned this. They deserve credit as well for giving him the platform and letting him grab the brass ring, however you want to put it. So Ospreay's an incredibly different kind of wrestler. Obviously, he is not necessarily a talker, as far as I can tell. He is a worker. He is a spectacle. He is wild to watch. He does crazy stuff. And there's room for that, especially in that kind of company where they place a value on matches. And they still have Bryan Danielson. They still have Moxley. They still have Cesaro. They have Claudio. They have a ton of guys to run him up against. And Kenny will be back someday. And I'm sure, like you said, Kenny versus Ospreay is already a thing. And so that will be huge if and when it happens again. But yeah, it's just, I hope for his sake that, because it is, one of the things I will say, looping back to this doc, is there's a part in the doc where he comes back to the UK after he wins Best of Super Juniors, and the crowd is going wild for him. And they show a big chunk of that segment of just people cheering him and him soaking up the adoration and the love of the fans, and like finding it hard to respond. And like, I know most wrestlers would feel the same way, but like there seems like there's a genuineness to him. Like he seems like one of those guys who is truly like, I could not do anything else. This is all I know how to do. This is what I was put here to do. I'm giving it my all, and I'm throwing myself into it because I know no other way. And so I think that's infectious. And like, I appreciated seeing this doc, because I did, as haphazard and kind of shitty as it was, I was like, okay, this guy is endearing and this guy grows on me. A guy I mostly knew for having a few good matches. Now I see him and like, this guy seems like a dude who really wants to be something special, and has the tools and the talent to be something special. So I hope that you're right. And then when they put him in that position and they give him the spotlight, that he's able to run with it.
He definitely has like the typical archetype of I'm going to be a wrestler backstory of like, yeah, I was on a trampoline, and then I figured out a way to fix a ring together, and then all the friends used to come over. Bad student and couldn't pay attention in class, and
not good at book reading, but
everyone questioned his motives, and he succeeded despite everybody's second guess. It's like, oh yeah, I know. Like, I feel like that you just described like 50 different people who enter this industry, but not to throw shade. It's just like, it's just funny because it's like, I feel like that's a pretty typical story.
It is. It's the same type of thing no matter what. And I also like the part where it's like his friends are, they talk about the ring in the backyard, and most of his normal friends are like, we took one bump and then we were like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this hurts. I don't like this. And then someone like Ospreay is like, I'll do this the rest of my life 1 million times. And so there are certain people who will take those bumps, and many more rational people who won't. And he's one of those guys who does not care. And so that's endearing as well. I would certainly consider myself as one of the people who would never want to take a bump like that, no, let alone 2 or 5 or a million. But it's when someone is willing to do that, they're willing to do pretty much anything.
Yeah, he's done pretty much almost everything. So
yeah, he's had a hell of a career. I mean, that's the doc does show some stuff. Like there's Paul Heyman giving him the rub back in the day, which is pretty wild. Like the fact that Paul Heyman acknowledged him years ago and before he was even the Ospreay we know now. Like that's pretty impressive. There's Hornswoggle saying that he should be signed, which is great. If anyone has an eye for talent, it's got to be Hornswoggle, right? So there's a wide array of there's little nuggets in here where I'm like, man, like I've never seen this before. There's things here that I like there's just I like it's this is I know we'll never actually follow through on this, but like if we had a camera crew and a wrestler and we could like get footage and put a doc together, like I feel like people like you and I've seen so many of these, we could tell such a cohesive story with something like this. Like it's not even that hard too. Like just tell the story that like I know you gotta sift through stuff and there's time and there's energy and resources, but like there's just all you need is like 6 or 7 really good nuggets and like 4 or 5 talking heads and like 90 minutes of footage and you're good. Like it's a shame when it goes to waste a little bit like this because there is something there and it's and when it turns out to be is the sum is its parts are interesting and then the sum of those parts is bad.
It seems that they got a lot of people to sit down and talk to them about this guy,
like
though.
Said,
which
it's always star-ish guys and then guys who turned in stars pretty soon after.
So I mean, the booking list is impressive, but they didn't really say anything of merit. So it's like, all right, well, what's the point of booking all this talent if we don't have a story here?
Well, we'll see what happens with Ospreay. Like I said, it's a weird time for AEW. We're recording this pretty soon after the Royal Rumble, the most successful non-WrestleMania show apparently in WWE history. So, like, one company is reaching new heights, even though their chairman is a creep and their former chairman, and one company is floundering a little bit. But if AEW knows what they're doing, they'll, like you said, there's a vacuum at the top right now. They'll bring him in and they'll let him go for the belt. Like a lot of the guys AEW brings in, your Andrades, your Malakais, the guys who seem to be floundering in their own right along with the company. They bring them in and they never really, they never get to break through and have an actual main event run. Like they never get to actually fight for the belt. They never get to, there's a few people in the way and they can never seem to get through. Like if Ospreay gets stuck doing mid-card shit when he comes in, I think that would be a huge mistake. Like this guy's a former world champion. You got to let him go for the gold right away. Otherwise, why are you even doing this?
Yeah, you can't Jay White him.
No, you should not Jay White him. Although people seem to enjoy Jay White. I think Jay White's doing okay for himself, but you're just gonna tread water eventually. Like you gotta like really strap the rocket to somebody. You can't just mid-card him to death.
Yeah. Also, you said persona non grata earlier, and I thought you were going to be talking about someone else. Marty Scurll, but it's funny that we got back around to it anyway.
Yes, there are. We'll address that, and obviously it's the top wrestling news. We're not going to talk about it today, but
I hear Vice is fast tracked a part 2 to their.
Actually, we should just say that 9 lives of Vince McMahon shit that we talked about a long time ago. How outdated and stupid is that now? Like, whoa, because the whole point of that was Vince did all these misdeeds, but you can't keep the guy down. And now it's like, well, you sure can. Apparently he's A, even worse than you thought, and B, you can keep him down because he is finally so awful that we're just kicking him out entirely. So just
9 lives turned to 0 pretty quickly over the course of a weekend.
And also, if you're going to be Vice, if you're going to be the channel that does hard-hitting exposés, and you put together a shitty clip show, and there's this mountain of other stuff out there that you don't provide any new insight into, and then you get scooped a couple years, like a year later, it's just like it's pretty bad.
Talk about another doc that wasn't quite a doc. But
I'm not sure which one I liked less, to be honest. Like I think I probably like this more. I think I enjoy this one a little bit more, especially these days. So
that's something. It's a bar to exceed.
So we'll talk about Mr. McMahon at some point, unfortunately / fortunately, because we have to. But for now, if you have $2 to kill and you really want to see what Will Ospreay was up to in like 2018 pre-COVID, You can see Ospreay, The Rise of an International Pro Wrestler on Amazon Prime and probably everywhere else so you can rent things. So I don't think we recommend it, Walt. Is that right?
I cannot in good faith deem this a treat.
No, it's not a treat, but it's $2. So I've spent $2 on probably dumber things. I will say that.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, well, damning it with the faintest praise possible. Well,
Sure.
if you want to hear us talk more about some of the stuff we talked about today, Kenny Omega, Wrestle Kingdom, any number of things, you can find all of our episodes at our archives, awesometruth.libsyn.com, and you must subscribe for new episodes, all sorts, and the old ones as well, easily downloadable. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere podcasts are delivered. Walt, thanks for coming on and talking about Will Ospreay. We got it done. It was not our most riveting topic, but he's, it's a guy, and it'll give me a new appreciation for if and when he comes into AEW and starts doing some stuff. So we'll at least have that going for us.
Yeah. I mean, well, obviously he's going to be on the Awesome Truth radar moving forward for whatever that means.
The highest praise you can get is you're officially on the AT radar.
Yeah. Yes. So.
Also, Walt, I should know, I don't know if you saw this at the Royal Rumble, Truth and Miz did the Awesome Truth pose.
I did see them have back-to-back entrance.
Yes,
so.
It was one. I saw them come in. I was actually, my son was sick, and I was holding him and watching in the other hand, and I was like, "Do the pose, do the pose, do the pose," and they did it, and it was pretty great.
Yeah, we should have just had a whole podcast on that, an emergency podcast.
That's true. Well, if people made it through the whole way, they'll be delighted by that mention of it at least. So.
Yeah, Awesome Truth podcast about Awesome Truth.
Hey, it's just good to see them back. They're truly one of the most underrated little tag teams. So I'm happy I'm happy H obviously likes them too. So it's nice that H is in charge, and one of his edicts was we got to reunite Awesome Truth, even just with some Easter eggs for the fans. So.
I think it's nostalgia for Awesome Truth. It's like that nostalgia clock.
Yeah, that's true. For a thing that was, like 9 years ago or something like that? I guess more
for
than
like
that,
3 months.
Well, thank you all so much for listening. And remember, the truth will set you free.